We're hoping to make a kind of publicly accessible database of memories of extreme weather events, so people can sort of tap into things that have happened in their communities, so local weather can be something they can be part of. And I think this is something that's much more meaningful to people at the community level than big questions about climate change, because climate change ultimately, when it's happening, is manifested at the local level in different ways, and so getting at the kind of local message and the local signals is what we're really interested in. We're doing a sort of material reconstruction of extreme events, so hopefully tracing back the records to periods that we haven't got, other sources of information for. So we've got instrumental weather records that tell us about extremes going back to the later part of, let's say, the 19th century, longer in some areas. But equally, we're interested in sort of extending that record back to sort of think about frequency and duration of extreme events as well. So there's a kind of material reconstruction element to the project as well as a kind of conceptual element to the project. We're interested in the way in which people remember things differently, as much as the events themselves. So yes, we're going to be exploring the events that have taken place and when they took place and the kinds of events that have taken place going back to about 1700, but we're also interested in the different ways in which people have remembered those things and how those events have been remembered through technology, adaptation, narrative, folklore, myth, legend, poetry, all these different kinds of things.
Where on earth do you begin? Because aren't we obsessed by the weather, the British? There must be an enormous amount of material out there.
It is a bit of an obsession, and that's why this project has the potential to be quite a rich project in many respects. We're going to begin with the archives. There's many different types of historical documentary material that we can tap into in the different regions that concern us in the project. And so we're beginning with the archival records and testimonies and diaries that we can trace and which we can explore for excerpts of information about the weather, and there's lots of these in different parts of the UK, because this obsession that we have is not a new obsession. It's something that's been going on for hundreds of years, even longer, but the documentary records that we're interested in exploring go back to about 1700.
Why did you think that we needed to do a research project like this?
I think there's a lot of interest in big things like climate change and big issues to do with the climate that focus on things like global warming. Extreme events in particular are probably the most interesting aspects of climate changes at the big scale, simply because they kind of take people unawares, and people have to react in quite rapid ways to them. And they're not the norm, and they're not anticipated in many respects. So things like floods and droughts can have quite dramatic impacts as a result, and they can engender very different kinds of responses as a result. So we're interested in looking at extremes for that reason. There's the archive side of the project, but there's also the oral history side of the project. And one of the things we're very interested in doing is talking to local communities about experiences, understanding of extreme events. And so these will be local communities in our case study areas. And we're interested in the way in which they remember things, but also how extreme events have become embedded within their cultural fabrics in the form of many different forms, from when people decide to put their washing out to myths and legends or folk memory attached to the weather. We're interested in weather lore, L-O-R-E, weather lore. We're interested in those kinds of folkloric memories of weather as much as we are in actual memories of weather. So and we're seeing whether any of them have got roots in reality, or whether any of them have been sort of changed over time, modified over time. So we're interested in all that. We're not specifically looking at places like Boscastle or Cockermouth, or Hull, for example, but we are interested in looking at specific regions which have been identified as being at risk or susceptible to increasing extremes or increased frequency and duration of extremes to do with floods, droughts, heat waves, and those kinds of extremes. I'm not in the business of prediction, but I think it will give us a handle on how people have reacted in the past to events that we might experience in the future, and that's always interesting and always valid in terms of looking at what works and what doesn't work in terms of adaptation.